Well, welcome back to the Maryland Family Matters podcast. My name is Jeff Trimbath, and I'm the president of the Maryland Family Institute. We're so grateful that we have a guest with us on this edition of Maryland Family Matters. Danny Funt is the author of a new book called Everybody Loses: The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. And what an amazing subject for us to be talking about this morning. We were connected through our sister organization in Ohio, the Center for Christian Virtue. And Danny's been talking about his new book. Just this morning, as I opened up my Wall Street Journal, as I do every day, I noticed that the book is reviewed in today's journal. So congratulations on the publication of the book, the attention that it's receiving, and thank you so much for being here, Danny.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come to do what you're doing today, and then eventually come to write this book?
Well, for one, I'm a lifelong sports fan, and I had grown up with the expectation that the leagues would never promote gambling. I had read about the Black Sox scandal when the 1919 World Series was fixed by the Chicago White Sox, and how devastating that was to sports, and how the leagues had devoted so much energy to thwarting the expansion of gambling outside of Nevada, at least. So that was my expectation. And then things just changed so abruptly around 2018 when there was this Supreme Court decision and the floodgates opened and a few dozen states raced to legalize sports betting. I found that disorienting, and I wondered what happened to all of the concerns that I used to hear about how this would threaten the health of people, that it was bad for sports, and the way that we engage with sports would be cheapened if people are worried about bets as opposed to the games themselves. All of that felt like worth investigating because the answers that I was hearing from people in power in sports, in media, down the line, didn't really add up. I felt like there had to have been more to the story.
And so, in order to answer those questions that started arising in your mind as a sports fan, a lifelong sports fan, you turned to your training as a journalist to dig into this. You're a graduate of Georgetown, not far from where we're at here in Maryland, and then went to Columbia as a trained journalist. So you put those journalistic skills to work in investigating this issue. And I guess the culmination of the years of work that it took you to write this book is what we're looking at today. In the book, you talk about Americans' attitudes towards gambling, sort of being of two minds. Can you summarize those two minds that we have towards this subject?
This dates till going back all the way to the original colonies. And I
Hmm.
found that history fascinating. This is not a history book, and I didn't want people to feel like they had to eat their vegetables in those chapters to get to the good stuff of what's happening today. But I felt, and I've been happy to hear readers feel, that understanding that backstory is both very interesting and very valuable to understanding how things look today, because from the earliest days of the colonies had this tension between the fact that these were a lot of religious refugees who were skeptical of gambling and knew the damage it would do, and also had a theological basis for being opposed to gambling. But you just had a society that was gambling crazed from the start, with lotteries and card games and horse racing on down. Even the fact that the very beginnings of professional baseball were accompanied by a lot of gambling going on among spectators, and that for a while, baseball was thought of as basically a contrivance for gambling.
Huh.
I found that very interesting. But like I said, you had all these states that were determined to guard against that, whether outright banning gambling or certainly discouraging it. And that had a big religious motivation for a long time. And things seem to have changed, but it's not just the sports betting boom. It was a culmination of more casinos across the country, states embracing their lotteries, gambling being more of a mainstream thing, and a lot of the stigma seeming to wear off, at least in much of mainstream culture.
Yeah.
that allowed this explosion with sports betting to happen.
One of the aspects of that history that I found interesting was you talked about someone who is near and dear to every American's heart, but especially those of us here in Annapolis, and that is George Washington. And the reason he's so beloved here is because he did something that was frankly unthinkable in Annapolis. He stopped here on his way back to his farm in Virginia, and he resigned his commission as a victorious uh, general, which in Western history never happened. He did that here in Annapolis. He had an interesting thing to say about gambling. Do you remember what he said about it?
I wish I had the exact quote. They used it in that Wall Street Journal review because I guess it struck a chord with them too. Do
Yeah.
you have it by
Yeah,
chance?
he said that it is an evil, and he's seen many wonderful soldiers be ruined by this practice. So I thought that was an interesting
Yeah,
quote.
hearing that and even how people used to talk as recently as a decade ago with the
Yeah,
commissioners of sports also using that word evil, I've been struck for a while about how it seems like a lot of Americans don't speak in moral terms in the way that
yes,
they used to.
hmm,
And I didn't want it to be like the overriding focus of the book because that can be a part of that is that people bristle when they hear
yeah,
people talk about morality,
yes.
but it's so central to what's happened. And I think the fact that we don't like having those conversations open the door for all of these gambling interests to explode.
So let's talk about that door coming open. As I read the review of your book, something important happened in 2014. You had said before that time, all the major leaders of the leagues and so on were opposed to gambling, and then something happened. Talk about what happened there, and who sort of approached the subject differently.
Right. So the NBA had a new commissioner in Adam Silver, who had been the deputy to David Stern, the longtime commissioner who had just retired. And I wanted to get into the heads of these commissioners because they spoke, as we've been discussing, in such emphatic terms about how much they dislike gambling. I want to know who really had genuine convictions about that. And David Stern, through all my reporting, definitely felt in his heart that gambling was awful for sports and not
Hmm.
something that they should promote. But he retires later that year. Adam Silver shocks the sports world by writing a New York Times op ed saying that he was in favor of the legalization and regulation of sports betting. It seems noteworthy that he said this should be done at the federal level,
Hmm.
and it's been done entirely at the state level. And the
Yeah.
NBA actually had a hand in that. So whether he really wanted Congress to be the ones setting the ground rules about gambling, I don't know. But that was such a turning point, not only because it was shocking to the other leagues, because they were joining the NBA in federal court, resisting an effort in New Jersey to overturn a federal ban on bookmaking outside Nevada. They were, on the one hand, saying in court, this is terrible for our leagues, it shouldn't be allowed. And then Adam Silver goes and says, actually, let's legalize this. So that
And
was
and
significant.
and
Yeah.
as he made that argument, I took note of you had mentioned he said that he did this so that we can bring it into the light to regulate, monitor it. I was fascinated to read that that was his sort of justification for changing on this subject because I feel like with that's the same logical rationale that so many other previously forbidden activities have been used to legalize them, so drugs, prostitution, even divorce of all things, let's make it more acceptable so that we can make the division more civil and so on and so
Mhm.
forth. I mean, was that an interesting argument that you grappled with?
It was, but it hinges on the argument that there wouldn't actually be any more gambling. It would just
Mm,
transition an illegal activity to a legal one. And
yes.
as a result, you could tax it and look out for customers. That never happens, and it's so obvious why. If you can download these apps on the App Store and there's nonstop ads and famous athletes are now being paid a lot of money to promote gambling,
Yeah,
of course we've seen a groundswell of the number of people taking this up.
yeah,
Just like you see when cannabis is legalized and some of those other things you mentioned.
yeah,
So that I found disingenuous. And the other side of that argument was that it would somehow make it easier for the leagues to detect improper betting because they
mm,
would be able to monitor betting activity. And it's hard to do that when it's happening under the table.
mhm,
And if they saw someone who shouldn't be betting or even suspicious patterns in wagering, they could investigate now. I spend some time in my book debunking that through
mm,
interviews with people in sports, even at the companies that do that investigating. And they said, for one, the black market is still vibrant. So if you were determined to fix a game or to be betting when you shouldn't, you could still just go to an illegal operator. But number two, the number of things that you can bet on now is so much greater than ever
yeah,
before because if
yep,
you're doing it on your phone, it makes it easy to bet on all these bets within the game. Like in a football game, will the next possession be a score or something? You could never do that if you're betting over the phone or even in person in Las Vegas. And so that is an impossible amount of ground to cover. So these
yeah,
two fundamental rationales for his argument, one, there won't be any more betting than ever. And two, we'll be able to catch improper betting in a way we couldn't before. Both of those arguments really fall apart when you
yeah.
examine them more closely.
And it just sort of strikes me that it is a this point you're making is a wonderful illustration of something that I read that Aristotle said, which is that the law is a teacher. And so when you change the law, it then teaches you a new behavior. And so if you change the law from this is not good to this is allowed, of course, you're going to get more of that.
Yeah,
So,
that's a great point. I feel like this is it's a high stakes topic because of the dangers that it's inviting and the damage it's doing. But it is also just like an intellectually interesting one
yeah.
of what's the proper role of policymakers, what vices should be legal so that we can enforce regulations, all of that. This just really is a useful case study
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Let's talk about some of those implications of this decision. Yeah, and I want to bring up two uh, 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 words from chemistry, I guess, brain chemistry. You mentioned both dopamine and serotonin in your analysis of the implications of this. Talk about what role those two chemicals play in the whole subject of sports betting and why that's important.
Yeah, it was interesting to me because I had assumed you hear people reference the dopamine hit that
Yeah.
gambling gives them, and I had assumed that when you win, you get that hit, and that's not the case. The
Huh.
dopamine is released in the brain when you're pursuing a reward, and especially when you feel like you're right on the verge of getting it. So I
Mm,
imagine if you were out hunting and the prey was within arm's reach, you might get a dopamine rush,
yeah.
and then when you get the reward, it releases serotonin. But dopamine and that experience of those dopamine hits is a very addictive process. Like that is a pathway toward getting hooked on something.
Yeah.
And there's something about the way that you get intermittent rewards in gambling and that you get the feeling that you're right on the verge of winning when you're so often not.
Mm,
With a slot machine, it might be like that one outcome that you need doesn't quite get there.
yep.
Or with a lot of betting now, you get this false sense of being on the verge of a big win when that's not how the odds work. Just
Mhm.
hope this isn't too complicated, but as an example of that, a lot of people now place parlays, which are combining a number of different bets together,
Okay.
and you win much more money if they're all successful, and you lose if any of them are unsuccessful.
Mm, mm,
So let's think you might bet on five different things, and you need all five to hit.
Wow.
The odds of going 4 out of 5 are 5 times greater than going 5 out of 5. But if you or I went 4 out of 5, we might say, "I'm on to something. I've
Yeah.
figured this out. I need to keep doing this and doing this," and you're gonna have a very intense dopamine experience.
Right.
And that's why that's an especially addictive style of betting, and for a lot of people, it's the only way they bet on sports now.
And you talk about how uh, how the industry sort of manufactures this dopamine sort of experience, but the odds are always in the house's favor. So you never quite get that payoff. And in fact, I was really interested. You mentioned if you do get that payoff, a big payoff, all of a sudden the company's posture towards you changes and they respect you.
Dramatically.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't realize that.
I wanna explain that a bit, but I just
Yeah.
wanna say this idea of the delusion that's so fundamental with sports betting where you think you can outsmart the bookmaker, that's one of the most seductive qualities of it because
Mm.
hopefully, even if you think you've got lady luck on your side, if you sit down at a roulette wheel or a
Yep.
blackjack table, hopefully you know the odds are fixed and you're gonna lose money over time.
Yep.
In sports, even though you might know that the house has an edge in how the odds are constructed,
Mhm.
you could think, I know my team or my favorite sport or whatever,
Right.
and I can
Right.
use that knowledge to outsmart them. It doesn't work that way. For one, it's just incredibly difficult to outsmart the betting world that's shaping those odds,
Yep.
just like it's hard for an individual to pick stocks better, outsmart the market. But also, as you were saying, forget winning. If you just show that you know the types of bets that will give you a good chance of winning, they'll cut you down dramatically.
Huh.
To the
Interesting.
point that I've seen people who can bet pennies at most on major sports. There was one funny example in Maryland where a guy signed up for a regional operator called Crab Sports, one of the smaller sports books that I think only exists in Maryland. And before he placed a single bet, they said, "Hey, we've looked you up.
Hmm.
We know that you have a reputation for being a savvy sports bettor. We're not going to let you bet much here.
Yep.
Don't even think about it."
Yep.
And you might say, "Well, they're running a business. That's their prerogative." The problem is that their advertising tells such a different story.
Yep.
It's so heavy-handed in suggesting this is a way to win money, leverage your knowledge, and turn your love of sports into a side hustle or a moneymaker,
Yep.
and yet their business model is completely the opposite of that.
But I just think how um, nefarious that practice is, particularly with regard to young men who are prone to risky behavior themselves by their very nature, and these marketers, these sports betting companies are playing on that to get them addicted early, and that's just a terrible thought to think about.
That has to be among the most alarming things we're seeing is this sudden obsession that so many kids have with gambling. There was a study a few weeks ago that a third of boys between 11 and 18 have now gambled before they're of age.
Unbelievable.
I live in North Carolina. Half of the calls to our problem gambling hotline are coming from concerned parents who are so worried about how their kids are desperate to find ways to bet now. And they're betting on all sort of things when they have a problem. But
Yeah.
so often I'm told sports is the gateway because
Yeah.
they're already fans of sports. It feels so normalized that, and oddly, a lot of maybe not the parents who are calling the hotline, but a lot of parents seem to think, well, there's a lot worse they could be doing. So I'll even go so
Yeah.
far as to facilitate their
Yeah.
betting because at least they're not out drinking
Yeah.
or getting into
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah.
And I think before long, people are going to realize that's a terrible idea because a gambling problem is bad at any age. But as a kid, when your brain isn't fully developed and it can just be so destructive to your mental health and your academics and all that. And it can also lead you to develop other substance problems.
Yeah.
It's a really bad idea to get caught up in gambling as a teenager.
We're talking with Danny Funt, the author of Everybody Loses, a book about American sports gambling. As we are coming to the close, Danny, I wanted to conclude by asking you a question, jumping off of the last statement you made. You made reference to parents. And so the question is, uh, what, in light of your research here in this book, what can parents do to help protect their kids against this? And then finally, what can churches do? Maryland Family Institute is a Christian ministry, and we work with a lot of churches across the state. What can churches do to address this issue?
I'd say as a parent, for one, definitely don't facilitate betting like we were saying, but also be on the lookout for ways your kids might be betting that are a little bit of a subtle way of having them risk money on things without they might not be playing blackjack on their phone or poker, but there are a lot of video games now on your phone that you hear about loot boxes, which is basically you pay money for an unknown prize in your game.
Mm,
And that's very similar to the brain chemistry that you experience when you're doing any other form of conventional betting. So
mm,
be on the lookout for that because that can be a pathway in for a lot of kids. Also, I think there's a real good case that schools should be incorporating education about the risks involved with gambling and
yep,
what to be wary of. Perhaps as young as middle school or elementary school.
yep.
If kids are developing problems at that age, why not educate them at that age?
Mhm.
So I know some states are pushing for that. It strikes me as sensible in the same way we teach them about drugs and alcohol and whatever else. Gambling is just a reality that they have to navigate now. And as far as churches go, I don't know. I feel like if they can get people to think about some of those deeper discussions that we touched on
Yeah.
of beyond what's going to lose you money, what's good for you,
Mm,
what's good
mm.
for your soul,
Yeah.
what is the way that you want to engage with the things you care about, whether that's sports or politics. Now there's betting on politics. Just thinking about health in a more holistic sense can be a useful conversation that is often best in a religious community.
It's great advice. Danny, thank you so much for being on Maryland Family Matters podcast. Again, the book is Everybody Loses: The Tumultuous Rise of American Sports Gambling. Danny Funt has been our guest on Maryland Family Matters. We're so grateful that you joined us, and we look forward to the next conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.